Good morning, students. I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about the beginning of chapter 4, which is Leviticus. But before we even get there, let's talk about Nostra Aetate. Now, in my lectures today, I'm going to go back over and see what you yourself have learned about Nostra Aetate, and also any words that might not be clear to you. Deicide, for example, meaning the killing of God, was an accusation that was leveled at the Jewish people for centuries, for the past 2,000 years, and it's unfair. It is unjust, it is evil, it is sinful, okay? Because the fact of the matter is that Jesus Christ took on our human nature. He, God the Son, fully divine, one of the three persons of the Trinity, took on human nature. He was conceived in the womb of Mary by the power of the Holy Spirit. He was born a small child into a poor family from Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem. He suffered throughout his life the abuse that many poor people suffer. People looked down on people from Nazareth and from Galilee as though they were lesser than. They weren't. And Jesus walked among us. And no matter what our background, poor, rich, somewhere in between, man, woman, child, Gentile, Jew, he was there for all of us and still is. And to accuse anyone of his death is to misunderstand that Jesus is a Savior and Redeemer of all people, and he willingly died out of pure love for all of us, because in the circumstances, that was what needed to happen. And so really, if you're going to blame anyone, we just have to point the finger at ourselves, because we're all sinners in need of his grace. And so the church really created this document because it saw, after the horrible devastation of World War II all around the world, countless innocent people dying, not just soldiers, civilians, under the most terrible conditions. And Nazism and the concentration camps killed millions of Jewish people simply because they were Jewish. There was no other reason. The hatred that caused this terrible Holocaust, or the Shoah as it's called in Hebrew, we cannot have that happen. And there were other people that were designated also for termination by the Jews. And when you study history, I hope you look at that very, very carefully. The Roma, the Gypsies, they also were being destroyed. People who were gay, people who were disabled, people who were conscientious objectors, people who defied Nazism and embraced the rights, the human rights of other people. All of these people were killed. Maximilian Kolbe, Saint Maximilian Kolbe, was so tough that they could not kill him by starving him to death. They had to give him a lethal injection. But he chose to die to preserve the life of another person. So, we'll talk more about Nostra Aetate in class. For now, what I'm going to do is teach you about Leviticus and also about the Ten Commandments, because we will see them again in Deuteronomy. So the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments, are found 2 times in the Torah or Pentateuch. They are found in Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 to 17, in which Moses is teaching the first generation at Mount Sinai. He comes down with the tablets of the law. They're busy breaking all of them by dancing around the golden calf that they just created, an idol that they're claiming saved them from Pharaoh and slavery in Egypt. What a lie. What a disgrace. What a sacrilege. But Moses, after breaking the 10 Commandments, the tablets of the law, goes straight back up to Mount Sinai, and God gives him 2 more tablets, and he teaches the people. 40 years later, they're at the edge of the promised land in Moab. And apparently the first generation did not do a very good job of teaching their children. They had all died out. Then Aaron and Miriam had died, and Moses was about to die. He was not going to enter the promised land because he too had been harsh and not treated people in the way that God wanted them to be treated. So he does not get to enter the promised land. But the younger generation, the second generation, have been schooled by God's love and wisdom and God's power and truth in the desert. So they are more receptive. They are going to enter the promised land under Joshua, the subject of chapter 5. They will be a disciplined people who always have the tabernacle, the presence of God, in their camp. They follow the column of fire by night and the column of smoke or cloud by day. And they learn how to live the commandments, which is the subject of Sukkot, the festival that our Jewish brothers and sisters are celebrating this week. So Moses is going to teach them the Ten Commandments the second time to this generation before they enter the promised land. So they will know how to live out their faith in a true way. The Ten Commandments or Decalogue is given for the first time in Mount Sinai to the first generation, for the second time 40 years later in Moab, at the edge of the promised land to the second generation. The second generation was under 20 years of age or not yet born when the covenants were given at Sinai. So really Joshua and Caleb are the only people of the first generation who are going to enter the promised land because they are the new leaders that God has commanded to lead the people. The law of Moses is also called the Mosaic Law or simply the law. This body of 613 laws are found in Exodus through Deuteronomy. It is meant to be a whole way of living life, loving God and neighbor, binding the chosen people to God and to one another. That is why the prayer shawl has 113 knots, which you find actually on the corners of the prayer shawl. There are knotted tassels. And if you were to add up all the different tassels, or rather all the different knots, it would be exactly 613 ways of loving God and loving your neighbor. What is unique about the Ten Commandments? How would it be different, say, from the Code of Hammurabi or other ancient codes? Well, Hammurabi claimed to have written it, and he gives his code of law to his God. But the Decalogue claims divine origin, that God was the author of the Ten Commandments, and also the author of the Hebrews writing, that God taught Moses how to write in Hebrew. Okay, this really is wonderful, and I have an actual wonderful book, an alphabet of the mystical meaning, the divine and spiritual meaning of the letters of the alphabet. So the Decalogue claims divine origin. God gave the Ten Commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai, according to the book of Exodus. In Israel, the king is not the giver of the law. God is. The king is subject to the law as part of the chosen people. Also, the biblical law is much more concerned with religious life and duties. Finally, the Ten Commandments, indeed the whole body of Mosaic law, is concerned about the interconnection between love of God and love of neighbor, worship, and social justice. And right now, I don't have this down on this slide, but the Ten Commandments are meant for everyone. Boy, girl, man, woman. It doesn't matter what your ethnic group is. It doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is. It doesn't matter whether you're a religious leader or a layperson. None of these outward things matter to God. We are all meant to know God, love God, have a close relationship with God, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And our neighbor is every other human being on the planet, no exceptions. Now, the book of Leviticus was probably written by a priest in the time after the Jews returned from exile after 538 BCE and after the temple was rebuilt. Leviticus concerns itself with 5 offerings and 7 feasts, which give structure to the relationship to God and to one another in holiness and peace. And some of the videos that I'm going to show you this semester are going to show people who are not Jewish. They're Christian and people of other backgrounds. And they also participate in the festivals because they find them to be meaningful. For example, I would not be surprised to see Baha'i uh, people in the festivals because their center of worship is in Haifa, Israel, and many of them are very faithful Israeli citizens. The Druze is another minority religion that, there are many Israelis who are Druze. They came out of the Muslim tradition, but they are separate, they are distinct, and they have been protected under Israeli law. And so they also are, real patriots, but they also participate, I'm sure, in these different festivals and many other people of goodwill. So we'll learn more about that. Now, who are the priests? Well, they are members of the house of Levi, and they led worship in the temple of Jerusalem. Now, we've learned about Yom Kippur. 2,000 years ago, when the temple was still in existence, and before that, the tabernacle in the time that the people were in the desert, and in Israel before the building of the temple by King Solomon. So in the tabernacle and in the temple in Jerusalem, they had sacrifices of atonement. The sacrifice of an animal expresses the individual's sorrow for sin. The blood poured out on the altar signifies life itself. The altar represents the presence of God. These sacrifices took place at first in the tabernacle and then in the temple in Jerusalem. Yom Kippur, which occurred a couple of weeks ago, is a solemn day of communal fasting and prayer for the forgiveness of sins. When the temple existed, the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctuary where God was believed to dwell, and utter the holy name of God out loud, Yahweh. Then he offered incense, the blood of a bull, and the blood of a goat. The blood represented the life of the people, offered to God to reconcile them with him. And these are 2 videos that you can watch. One is on the Jerusalem shofar, and another is a video on Yom Kippur. Diaspora is a Greek word meaning dispersion or scattered. During the dispersion, when Jews were scattered outside the Holy Land and Jerusalem, animal sacrifice was discontinued. Today, the sacrifice is prayer, almsgiving, fasting, good works, and Bible study. Also, the working for justice. You will find many Jewish people working side by side with Christians, with Muslims, with other people of goodwill to make sure that all human beings are treated with the dignity of just because they are human. They are equal to us in dignity and worth. Now, this is a video on the final celebration of Yom Kippur. It's a happy song. All the children are asked to come to the front. The shofar is blown. It's a happy occasion. And later they will have a meal together to break the fast. So if you want to watch that, these are short videos. They're really quite wonderful. The word diaspora or dispersion originally means that Jews were sent or forced by circumstances to live in foreign lands away from Jerusalem, the Promised Land, and their temple. So what happened in the early part of the 1st century, the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was destroyed, again, you know. And so Rome, the Roman emperor, sent people away out of the Holy Land. There were maybe 2 dozen or more communities that quietly remained in place for 2,000 years. They did not call attention to themselves at all. They prayed and worshiped God and were faithful to the Sinai covenant. But most people had to make a new home. So even after the Babylonian exile was over and people could return to their homeland, many did stay outside and made new homes in the Persian and the Greek and the Roman Empire. And then more people in the early part of the first century did have to leave. And so they too made their home in North Africa, in the Middle East, and in Europe. Now, the Leviticus has the holiness code. Leviticus chapters 17 to 26 are a collection of teachings put in by the priest writer because they show how true worship is expressed in everyday life. Love of God is shown by love of neighbor. The holiness code upholds such moral teachings as justice, honesty, compassion, care for the poor, the disabled, and foreigners. Every 50 years, debts are to be canceled, property returned to the original owners, and indentured servants to be set free from their servitude. And we will work on with the book of Numbers on Thursday.